All right. Hello, everybody. We are here today and we are with our beautiful Kelp Forest exhibit. I've been on these a few times and some of you might know me, but my name is Delaney and I'm part of our education department at Birch Aquarium. And then, Garrett, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Antika. I've also been on a lot of these very recently, so you might be tired of my face, but I'm here as well, and I'm also part of the education team. I'm an interpreter at the aquarium.
Yeah, so we are here today to engage with you and talk to you through our Facebook live Kelp Forest chat. So if you have questions and you want to ask them throughout our discussion, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. But we have a live feed of our Kelp Forest exhibit at Birch Aquarium that's going to be playing for you. And we can already see a lot of animals kind of moving around. And Sheikah and I were just talking about the sea bass, how she likes to hang out at the very top. And sometimes she doesn't come into view, but hopefully she's not too stubborn today and she kind of swims down a little bit so we can get a little bit of a better view of her later on. But to kind of just introduce a little bit about the aquarium, if you're not aware of who we are, we're Birch Aquarium. We're located in San Diego, and we are still currently closed. So we're engaging with all of you on a virtual platform today. And you can always tune in to check out the Kelp Forest Cam, which is it's always live on our website. But we're gonna dive in and just talk about what we see, talk about some of the animals. And Sheikah, what else are we gonna be talking about today that's been happening recently in our local waters?
Yeah, so you guys might have noticed if you've been out snorkeling or at the beach that the water off of La Jolla has been kind of cold recently. And you might be kind of confused because it's summer and it's supposed to be nice and warm, but we have these things called upwellings, which cause some cold water. So we'll talk about that today as well.
Yeah, I think being from San Diego and from Southern California, during the summertime, we get some really beautiful weather. But, and Chico, we're kind of used to the water being cold. I think what's so interesting and funny is when people come over from usually warmer climates, maybe like Florida, they're used to the water temperature being really in the 80s during their summertime. So they come over to sunny California maybe to visit and they're shocked by how cold the water is. And I go, cold. Because for us, it feels nice. If it's maybe in the high 60s or the low 70s, we can manage to and still enjoy ourselves in the ocean. But some other people find it to be really cold. So even though we might have a nice outside temperature of the air, the water can get cold sometimes. And that's due to these upwelling events. So we're definitely going to talk about that because that a lot to do with the health of our kelp forests that are right off of our coast. And you want to talk to us a little bit about this exhibit? Anything that you find exciting about it or what your favorite part of it is?
Yeah, so I really like the fact that we have kind of like a natural current, kind of like natural waves going back and forth in the tank in the exhibit, just because I think it's really, really cool the fact that kelp kind of needs some wave action in the exhibit in order to survive. So not many aquariums actually are able to have live kelp in their exhibits, and we're one of the few, which I think is super cool that all of that kelp in there is actually alive versus other aquariums that might have to have some fake kelp in their exhibits. And we've kind of modeled our ideas and kind of figure out the best way is to have a little bit of wave action. And I just think it gets really relaxing just sitting there and watching the kelp go back and forth. Sometimes I'll sit there and just watch it for a while. It's super relaxing.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Zen moment, right? I mean, when we are open and we have guests in this exhibit, they kind of just zone out watching this exhibit because of the way the kelp moves back and forth. And I think that's a really interesting point, Anshika. You know, if you visit other aquariums throughout the country, let's say you visit an aquarium in a state that is landlocked, so it's not surrounded by any ocean. They have to make their own seawater. And so that can be really challenging to grow live kelp in an environment in a closed system where they have to make their own seawater because you don't have those kind of natural elements of the water or nutrients coming through. So that takes a lot more work. And you have to make, obviously, even us, we have to make our own waves and movement. So this exhibit's so neat because there's a huge wave machine at the very top. It's kind of this big metal arm that pushes down in the water and it creates this kind of wave action we're seeing. And being an aquarium that we're on the coast of California, we're so fortunate because we have an open water system, which means that we don't have to make our own seawater. We get our fresh seawater right off of the coast of La Jolla, pumped from a really large research pier that's a part of Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So if you've never visited us before, I encourage you to look up some photos and you can see the large pier, and there is a large pumping system that brings fresh seawater up to our aquarium. So I think that's so fascinating to think about. You know, if you visit an aquarium that can't make their own seawater, that's a big extra step to take to make sure that stuff like this can grow.
Definitely, yeah. And so we'll just filter it down a bit just to make sure all the animals are healthy. But that's really interesting because when we had the red tides a couple months ago, that was actually reflected in some of our exhibits. So you could actually see the real-time effects of how the water gets a little bit foggier, a little bit murkier. And I think that's really cool to actually, it's one thing to say that the water comes from the ocean, but to actually see the effects of it, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. If any of you saw the recent red tide event, let us know in the comments, or if you've noticed the water being extra cold off the coast of San Diego or even other parts of Southern California. And let us know if you felt the water temperature change a little bit, because it definitely has over the last few weeks. So this exhibit, it's a big exhibit. Do you know how many gallons of water is in this exhibit, Anshika?
So I believe we have about 70,000 gallons of water in this exhibit. Am I correct, Delaney?
You're correct. I'm trying to translate that to like how many like bottles of water, or I mean, it'd be 70,000 gallons of milk. Imagine that. I like to make those comparisons for kids to kind of put it into perspective, right? But 70,000 gallons, that is a lot of water. This is our largest exhibit at the aquarium, which means that it actually holds a lot of different species of animals. So there's roughly about 250 individual fish or animals that actually are currently in this exhibit right now, which is a lot to take care of.
And what's really cool is you can, like, all of these animals you can find right here off the coast of San Diego. So it's really cool because this is a really common habitat right off our coast. Kelp forests are found all along the coast of California. And so it's super cool to see these animals that are swimming right off the shore of La Jolla.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, in designing an exhibit, we make sure there's a lot of diversity. So there's around 20 different species of animals in this exhibit. And of course that fluctuates and that changes depending on what animals we have maybe coming in from other aquariums. You know, with this aquarium system, we might trade certain species of fish with other aquariums if they have more space, or if we're looking to get a certain type of species of fish, we might get that from a different aquarium. Also, what helps to kind of build up the ecosystem and the life of this exhibit is being able to go and collect out in the wild. So our husbandry team is constantly working so hard to make sure that our exhibits are nice and healthy. And they've actually been a part of our essential staff during the time we've been closed. So myself and Anshika aren't physically at the aquarium, but our husbandry team, our aquarists are there taking care of the exhibits around the clock. And from time to time, they might go out and collect certain species of fish. And that's really to make sure that these animals serve as ambassadors and a way for people to connect with an environment that they might not get to see in the wild. You know, and Shika, you're an avid scuba diver, and really the only way to see a kelp forest is to go scuba diving. So getting a chance to see it like this is really spectacular for a lot of our guests.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes you don't get this good visibility out in the ocean. So yeah. It's a really cool experience, and it's a really great way to just kind of connect with an ecosystem that you really wouldn't be able to see otherwise.
Yeah, that's funny, the visibility. That's a really good point. We always have great visibility, 100% visibility with our exhibits, right? But if you go scuba diving, kind of that scuba diving lingo is to talk about what is the visibility, which means how many feet of visibility. It might be 15 feet, it might be 20 feet, 30 feet. Sometimes it's 5 feet, and that might not be the best time to go diving because you want to see more than 5 feet in front of you. And kind of talking about visibility and things that could affect that, Jules Jackson actually has a really interesting question, and it's, was marine life lost at the aquarium due to the red tide event? So Jules, that's a really good question, and thankfully, our husbandry team, that's a part of their job, is to ensure the safety and protection of the animals we have on display. So a big part of that is maintaining healthy water quality and being able to make sure that they're keeping track of any events that might be happening in our coastal waters, because this is an open water system. So with that red tide event, fortunately, our aquarium staff they're on top of it, they're on it, and there's constant checks for the health of the water. So checking water quality means looking at the levels of the nutrients or chemicals in the water, and also making sure that they're watching animal behavior and health as well. So there wasn't any animals that were lost during the red tide event, because that is the job of our husbandry team. That's why they're essential staff right now, is because they have to be there in order to make sure that they can make these decisions around the clock to ensure that the animals are staying safe. So when we start to see these red tide events off the coast, we have that timely warning of knowing, okay, we need to prepare our animals and we need to prepare the water system. So we're really fortunate that we're able to track that. And it's not just red tide events, but also water temperature too, right? And Shika, when the water off the coast gets really, really warm, that water's coming through. So our husbandry team then has to maintain the temperature. They might have to cool the water down a little bit. Or if it's really, really cold, maybe they have to warm it up a little bit. So it's a big, big job, but that's what their job is to ensure that the animals stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, and speaking about having really cold water, Delaney, do you want to tell us a little bit about the upwelling events that have been happening too?
Yeah, so during the summertime, we get what's called upwelling. So off the coast of California, we have winds that blow, and the way the winds work with water and ocean temperature is when the wind starts to shift, it will blow the warmer water the top surface away from the coast. And when that happens, it causes cold, deep water to upwell. It causes it to come up. So it's this wind blowing offshore causing cold, nutrient-rich water to then come up. And if you've ever been to the beach when there's upwelling happening, you feel the cold water. It's chilled to your bones, right? It's very, very cold. So for us, we might not enjoy that, but you know what does enjoy it are the animals and the kelp. So when we do have really warm summers and the water's really warm and we're not getting that mixture of water coming up, the kelp doesn't grow that well. It doesn't do very well in warm temperatures because it needs nutrients to grow. And warm water doesn't hold a lot of nutrients. However, cold water does. So when the upwelling happens, the winds shift, the cold water comes up. There's lots of nutrients in that cold water, which then allows the kelp to grow nice and healthy.
Yeah, definitely. Kelp likes a little bit colder of water too, so that's why it's found. There's a lot of thick kelp forests, like kind of off the coast of Monterey, things like that. And when we have that super cold water that comes in with the upwellings, the kelp is a lot happier during that time because they grow best in kind of that a little bit colder water.
Yeah, just like plants. Kelp, it's a type of algae. So algae is a little bit different from a plant, but they're comparable in what they need to grow. So they need sunlight, they need carbon dioxide, they need nutrients, they need water. So those are all essentials in order to make sure that this is an organism that can grow. And you might think, well, it's just an algae that's growing in the water, even if it's not growing for a little bit, that's okay, right? I mean, you kind of think about plants on land, if they're not growing for a while, what effects does that have? But you can just see, look at all the animals here that interact with the kelp. It creates this huge ecosystem, this huge network of life. So it's actually really important that when the kelp is growing healthy, that means the animals are healthy as well.
Yeah, so you can see here a lot of animals are using the kelp forest for protection. So a lot of what's really cool about kelp forest is that the bottom of kelp is actually a series of root-like structures called a holdfast. So it's kind of like a big tangle. And a lot of baby animals will use that as a nursery. So they'll be able to hide inside of those holdfasts and just kind of stay safe and protected like a little house. So if the kelp isn't growing super well, then they don't really have that house. So that's one way that a lot of animals that you might not be able to see actually use the kelp forest.
Yeah, during big storms, kelp can become uprooted, so that holdfast detaches from the rock it's holding on to, and they'll wash up on the beach. So if you've walked along Southern California beaches before, you might have seen something that looks like this root structure washed up on the beach, and that's the holdfast of the giant kelp. And if it's fresh enough, a lot of times you can pull it apart and dig through it, and you find all these tiny organisms, these juvenile animals that are using that as a nursery. So that's a really good point to make. And Shika is, even us looking at this right now, we see all the big fish swimming around, but that doesn't mean that there's smaller organisms living in that holdfast structure.
Definitely.
So there's a couple of really unique animals in here. And Shika, is there an animal that you would like to talk about that kind of interests you?
So one of my favorite animals, I don't know if I can see it right now, let me know if you can find it, is the California sheephead. So that animal is definitely one of my favorites just because it's so cool. So what I really love about it is that it actually starts its life as a female. So all California sheephead start their lives as females, and the females are a lot smaller and are kind of like a reddish color. We'll point it out if we see it, but they look more like a normal fish, kind of like that roundish shape, like a red pink color. And they live in groups. So what happens is a bunch of females will live together, and then the biggest female will actually turn into a male. So they're what we call sequential hermaphrodites, which means they start as females, and then the biggest one will turn into a male, but there'll only be one male in each group. So I think that that's really cool that if that male were caught or captured or ends up his life ends for just by getting eaten or something, then the next biggest female will turn into a male. That process takes only a couple days. So it's very immediate. As soon as there's no male presence in the group, then the biggest female will turn into a male. So I think that that's just a super cool thing to see, because the males look a lot different. They're kind of like a big rectangle, and they have like big stripes down the sides. So they definitely look a lot more vicious than the females, and they're a lot boxier too.
Yeah, the dimorphism between males and females in certain types of fish is really interesting, and that's one that's really interesting because you really can't miss a sheephead when you see it. It's especially the females, right? They have that unique kind of color block to them, and one of my favorite things about sheephead is they have really funny looking teeth. So they kind of have these teeth that kind of just stick out, almost looks like human teeth. And they almost have very big front teeth, right? Because they like to eat things that kind of have harder outside body parts, like a shell or a skeleton. They're used to kind of grabbing and being able to crunch things really easily. So if you don't know what a sheep's head looks like, I really encourage you to look one up. Or if you've been lucky enough to see one in the wild, they are such a unique fish. They're really, really cool. And that's one of the few species of fish we actually have in this exhibit where you can very easily identify a male from a female, right? Some of the other fish swimming in here, you see the bright orange fish, which we've talked about a lot on our Kelp Cam Lives, which is the Garibaldi, which is the California marine state fish. And that one, they don't have as much of a dimorphism between the sexes. The only way you can kind of indicate a male species of Garibaldi is being able to, or male individual of the species, the Garibaldi, is being able to see its behavior. So we typically have males in this exhibit, and they tend to be more territorial because they're protecting eggs. Some other fish that are in here are senoritas or some different species of sea bass. And those can be species of fish that sometimes we can't tell the males from the females, but the sheep's head is definitely one where you can tell.
And another really cool thing about the Garibaldi is that though you can't tell females from males, you can really easily tell babies from adults, because those babies actually have bright neon blue patches on them. So when they're younger and they kind of don't really know what they're doing, they have a little identifying features of just like these super bright colors, super bright blue on them, so that the older animals know that, hey, I'm a baby. Sorry if I'm getting too close to you. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing.
I'm still learning, right?
Still learning, yes.
There's so many cool fish in here. There's one that isn't swimming around like a typical fish. It's kind of sticking out of the kelp near the bottom. It almost looks like this giant worm from this camera here. So you might see it towards the left of our screen here. And it's moving exactly as we're talking about it. But that is one of our moray eels. So we've got, I think, 2 or 3 moray eels in this exhibit. And it's perfect because it's actually swimming around right now and it's going back into the kelp as we're talking about it. And this is a really fish. Yeah, it's hiding, of course. These are really cool animals. So in this exhibit, we actually get to see them up close. So the moray eels like to stick their heads out of the kelp. They're using the kelp almost as a way to camouflage. They'll move back and forth with it. But a lot of people aren't used to seeing eels in an open exhibit like this. They're used to eels hiding in caves or in rocks, which they do. You know, we have a lot of moray eels that live in local rocky tide pools, and they use small openings between the rocks to hide. But we've got ones in here and they're using the kelp to hide. And so they'll stick their heads out every once in a while. It's one of my favorite animals in here. I also think eels are so interesting just based off their body shape and also that they have 2 sets of jaws. So you know, they've got their front set of jaws or their teeth, but just set a little bit further back into their throat, they have a second set of teeth. So I can't imagine humans having that, right? You know, you have your food and then you have a second set of teeth to chew your food even more. Yeah. So you want to be really careful if you do see a moray eel in the wild. Like I said, they can be found in local tide pools. So you want to always be really careful when you're sticking your hands in the water because they have a pretty big bite. And that's something that our scuba divers have to be really careful about. So we don't have our scuba divers in the exhibit right now, but you can imagine this is a really big exhibit to take care of. So divers will go in weekly to feed the animals, to clean the exhibit, and to just check the overall health. And the eels will get curious and get up close. So it's something really important to keep an eye on.
Definitely. Yeah, I think eels are definitely such cool, weird looking animals. Like there's so few animals that have that like body shape and move like them. I think that they're just so odd and so funny looking, honestly.
Yeah, they're very, very unique animals. And just a nice comment that came through that I want to point out is from Elisa Shields. So she says she loves this tank. So nice to see these videos. My daughter studied here and I loved visiting her during those years. So thank you so much, Elisa, for the nice comment. And some of you might be wondering, how do you study at a place that's an aquarium? So something that I love to talk about on these Kelp Cam Lives is what makes Birch Aquarium really unique. So we're here to look at our Kelp Forest exhibit, but our aquarium, this exhibit couldn't happen without our connection to Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is actually a bigger connection, a part of UC San Diego. So what's really interesting about our aquarium is we're connected with a university, we're connected with an oceanographic institution. So we're so fortunate because that means that a big part of our mission is to not only connect understanding to protecting for guests that come through, being able to get them to understand the importance of our oceans and the animals, the organisms that live there. But it's also helping the public to understand what research is going on. If you've heard a scientist talk about research and talk about their area of study, a lot of times it's hard to make that connection of what is it truly that they're studying? How can I help? What is my connection to that as somebody who's maybe not in the sciences, who's just a guest at the aquarium? So that's a big part of our job, is to talk about relevant information, relevant research. And our work with scientists down at Scripps Institution of Oceanography is so important. You know, we try to provide a space for them to translate their research to guests that come through our doors. We have a number of scientists who are volunteer divers who actually dive in this Kelp Forest exhibit. So it's this really interesting, unique connection that we're so fortunate to be a part of. And it's a big part of what makes Birch Aquarium in my mind.
Definitely.
So thank you, Elisa. That was really great to hear. And yeah, because of that, we have so many students that will come to the aquarium for field trips from UC San Diego. So they are doing studies for their marine biology class. They'll make observations. We have a number of internships that we normally run throughout the year when we are open. So there's lots of opportunities. So if you are a college student, a high school student, I always encourage you to check out our website and just to see about different opportunities that we have. Of course, we don't have a lot of them going on right now because we're closed, but hopefully in the future, we have those opportunities running again for people. All right. So maybe we have about 5 more minutes. So if you've got questions about our Kelp Forest exhibit or anything about Birch Aquarium, please drop them in our comment section. And I want to talk about the big, beautiful fish that's been hanging out at the very top. She's kind of been coy and secret and not too much in our face during this Kelp Cam live. But Inchika, what big, big fish is hanging out at the top there?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of my favorite animals, kind of the star of the show in this exhibit, when you can see her. So she is a giant black sea bass, and she's really big. She's over 300 pounds, and she's about 30 years old. So we've had her since the aquarium opened, and I think she's just a really cool animal because giant black sea bass they start their lives super tiny. We actually have a baby giant black sea bass also at the aquarium. And so it's really cool to see how much they grow and how quickly they can grow throughout their lives.
Yeah, this is a fish that's highly protected off our waters. And its conservation status, it fluctuates between, being endangered. Some populations we might be seeing to stabilize slightly. It really depends on the environment, but these are a fish that's highly protected. They can accidentally be fished, because they're a large animal. They're obviously really easy to spot. And as a scuba diver, getting a chance to observe one of these in the wild, I know Inchika, you've seen them diving. I've had the chance to see them diving too. They're just a beautiful, beautiful fish. The way it's a giant black sea bass, of course, of its size, these fish can reach up to about 700 pounds. But they've got these really noticeable black polka dots, black spots on its body. So that's a huge, huge indicator. And she's turning for us. So perfect. You can actually see the spots on her right now. She's like, are you talking about me? Let me let the sun shine on my body for you so you can see my spots. Those are a big indication of being able to identify this as a black sea bass. But you can kind of see she's been at the aquarium for a really long time. She owns this exhibit. She hangs out at the top. She knows what she's doing. And that's her spot she likes. She likes being at the top of the exhibit. But of course she is active like she's being right now, and she will kind of drop down or part of the exhibit from time to time too.
Yeah. And so what's really cool is some of the ones that I've seen when scuba diving, they can get to the size of a small car, which is just kind of crazy to think about. Like they can get huge, like you're just swimming by and then this huge fish just goes right next to you. Because they're so big, they don't really need to be shy animals. So we're like, what's gonna happen to me? I'm just gonna go.
Their size does the work for them, right?
Yes, exactly.
We have a question coming through from Serafino, and what is the usual temperature of the water in the tank? That's a really great question. So the usual water temperature, it depends on the time of year. So just to give a little bit of background, I mentioned earlier that our aquarium is an open water system, which means that we pump fresh seawater right from the coast up to our aquarium. So this is an exhibit that is a temperate exhibit. So temperate means that is the type of environment, water temperature we have off of San Diego's coast, which means depending on the time of year, during the winter time, it might drop to being in the high 50s. During the summer, it can reach up to the low to mid 70s. So whatever the temperature is in the coastal waters, that's what the temperature of this exhibit's going to be. I did mention earlier, if there are drastic events where the temperature changes really quickly, our husbandry team might need to adjust that temperature slightly. But for the most part, this is an ecosystem that we're trying to match to an ecosystem you would find literally right outside our doors in the local San Diego. So we try to not touch the temperature of the water too much because it's a temperate exhibit. So I would say, on average around 65 degrees Fahrenheit would probably be the temperature of this exhibit. But again, that changes depending on if it's the winter time or if it's the summertime too. Great question though. And then let's see. We've got one more question that just came up from Raymond. So can you tell us about yellowtail migration patterns? That's a really good question. So yellowtail isn't something I'm familiar with. I don't know, Anshika, if you're familiar with yellowtail migration.
Not particularly.
Yeah, Ramon, I'm sorry I can't answer your question about yellowtail migration patterns. But what I can tell you is we've actually have seen them off of our coast before. So it's usually when the water temperature gets a little bit warmer. And I wouldn't say we've observed migrations of yellowtail, but what we have seen is we've seen them come close to Scripps Pier. So we actually have observed them feeding on large schools of fish right off of the Scripps Pier, which is right, you can see from Birch Aquarium outside of our tide pools at our tide pool plaza. And they're such a fascinating fish, and I actually should learn more about them. But, you know, they tend to be seen as close to shore like that, but times when we get warmer temperatures and sometimes newer species of fish coming through, we'll get large schools of fish, and we've seen yellowtail kind of hunting them right around the pier, and they're such a cool fish. They're so fast. I don't know if, Anshika, you've ever witnessed that off of Scripps Pier before or had a chance to see it. But it's
I haven't, but it sounds like it would be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, they're hard to miss, right? They have such a unique coloration to them, and their body shape is really hard to miss as well. But yeah, we'll have to maybe look into their migration patterns. I'm sure there's somebody, there's some scientist at Scripps that is possibly studying migration patterns of species of fish, and one of them might be the yellowtail as well, because I know that's a really popular commercial and recreational fishing species. All right. So we're pretty much out of time. If Anshika, if there's anything else you want to mention or talk about, but we had some really good questions come through today, and it was really fun to talk with you and talk a little bit about what's happening in our waters and get a chance to talk about fish.
Yeah, definitely. It's always great to talk about our local kelp forests. I love them. I love scuba diving them. I love snorkeling them. I love seeing our exhibits. So it's always great to talk about it and to talk to you, Delaney.
Yes, I definitely agree. Oh, this is a really great question. I feel like we have enough time.
Yes.
So Karen has a question from her 7-year-old who is curious, how can you pump ocean water into the aquarium without fish getting stuck in there? I like the wink. That's a really, really great question. Thank you for submitting that. You know, that is a really important question, right? Because if we're pumping seawater from the ocean, we do not want any animals getting stuck. So you can imagine it takes a really large team of experts and engineers and people who have the expertise to build a water pumping system that's going to be do the job we need it to do, but also be really safe for animals as well. So the very end of Scripps Pier, it's a really long pier. It's over 1,000 feet long. There are huge pumps that pump up seawater and then take it along this channel that is in the Scripps Pier and then pump it up the hill to Birch Aquarium. These pumps have really specialized filters in the water. So that first point of entry for the water, there are a series of filters that ensure that large animals, medium-sized animals, and small animals don't get through our system. So that is a really important question from Karen's 7-year-old, because that's something you need to think about, right? If you're designing a system that's going to get seawater through, you have to think about all the different variables. And one of those is, how do I make sure animals aren't getting through, right? So there's a series of filters. So that would be some type of mesh that's going to keep any big objects from coming through. Now, the exception to that is something that is tiny. And do you know what I'm talking about, Anshika?
I'm actually not quite sure.
You don't know where I'm going? Plankton. So plankton can come through. Plankton is either animal-like organisms, so that would be zooplankton, or plant-like or algae plankton, which is called phytoplankton. So those would be really tiny organisms that can possibly fit through. But like I said, it's an open water system, so they kind of just get pumped back out, and plankton's in all water. It's unavoidable to have it, but it's actually a part of creating a healthy ecosystem. So even though we can't see it, this exhibit has plankton in it right now, but that's all a part of that food web, and it's really important if it's zooplankton. So if it's animals, that contributes to the food chains, which build that giant food web. If it's phytoplankton, those are tiny algae that are photosynthesizing, creating oxygen for the water, which helps bigger algae like our giant kelp or the animals swimming in it. So great question. So thank you for asking that. But now we are officially out of time. And just thank you guys so much for tuning in. We love talking with you and engaging with you, even if it's on a virtual platform. And definitely please keep checking our social media and our website to see when we'll be open again. But we hope to keep engaging with you on a virtual platform, having different opportunities to do that. And Anshika, it's always great talking with you and getting to work with you, even if it's not in person. So it was really fun.
I agree. Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good day.